Under threat from UKIP. What about Ed Miliband's position? Are you happy with Labour's position on welfare?
I think that welfare is a kind of a complex issue. Again, it's a bit of a mask for people's concern about the future, about jobs, about how we spend money.
Has Ed Miliband been clear about the policy on welfare? Because it's a big concern on the doorstep.
I think our welfare policy is evolving. I think that nobody suggests that as it is now, it's absolutely right. Every big government project, department, service has to constantly be under review and looked at.
Is Ed Miliband an asset to the party?
He's doing fine, isn't he? He's made progress. He's, you know... God, would we like to have done better? Yes, of course. But are we making progress? Yes. It's about your direction of travel.
It doesn't sound like a ringing endorsement, SIOBHAIN McDONAGH, to say he's doing fine. Is he doing well enough at this stage, bearing in mind the recession that we've had and the way the economy is?
I think he's doing extraordinarily well, given that, you know, how long ago was the general election announced? 2 years ago. That, you know, we got one of our worst results ever, and I think he's bounced back incredibly quickly.
Not much of a bounce back, SIOBHAIN, if you couldn't win Lancashire, which is one of your top targets, if you couldn't win Staffordshire, if you couldn't win Cumbria.
Well, you know,
those are really major failures on Labour's part,
I can sleep at night knowing that we got the largest share of the vote in parts of the country which are not naturally our own.
I understand that, but overall your vote share as the leading opposition was less than Michael Foot got in the equivalent elections when he was leader of the Labour Party.
Situation.
Let's just have a look. Nigel Farage has been on the airwaves today saying he's going to contest a seat in 2015. Are you worried it might be yours?
I'm very happy to take on all comers in Bromley and Chislehurst in 2015.
How would you handle it?
I would stick exactly to being straight with people about the real issues that confront this country, sorting out the economy, certainly dealing with immigration, because we need to toughen up on immigration, and also giving people a vote on a renegotiated, sensible alternative as to what we do for the future with Europe.
The last time London had council elections in 2010, you didn't win any seats. Do you think the capital's too liberal for UKIP?
Well, we just won a council by-election I mentioned earlier in Harold Hill, which is not far from your old stumping ground, Bob, with a real big result. We got UKIP polled more votes than Labour and the Conservatives.
How well are you going to do?
I think anything up to 50 to 100 UKIP borough councillors in London out of the 1,800.
Do you think that's pie in the sky?
I think Kerry's being optimistic there. Of course you've got to take...
Well, if you fix the economy, you'll be right.
Oh, well, I'm sure you're right, Kerry. But I think that what I'd say is this. Give you an example, Joe.
Fine.
I was in Swanley
Briefly.
yesterday. That's a very similar demographic to the Harold Hill area you're talking about. Conservatives won that seat, and so it doesn't automatically read across.
Well, time will tell.
Kerry, thank you very much. Since the days of the pea supers, air quality in the UK has been a concern. Now Britain's air has been deemed illegal. That's the judgment this week from the Supreme Court, and the worst offender is London. The case will now be referred to the European Court for a final ruling which could result in a swingeing fine for the UK government. So has enough been done to try and clean up our act? Jennifer Conway reports.
Nitrogen dioxide in our air. This polluter is one of those behind the premature deaths of over 4,000 Londoners every year. And according to the Supreme Court this week, it's so bad that the government is breaking EU laws. In London, it's the Mayor's responsibility to lead the charge on air quality.
Well, the Mayor isn't happy about the quality of air in London. That's why he's doing so much to address it, such as the huge package of measures that we're doing, which is retrofitting the buses, buying newer Euro 6, which is the cleanest, greenest engines you can get, retrofitting lots of buildings so that boiler emissions go down.
But some of the Mayor's opponents don't think he's doing enough, and soon enough.
He's failed to take the really tough action. He's talked about a future ultra-low emission zone for London, but he's only going to start investigating to see whether it's feasible for 2020. That's far too late.
The first air targets set by the EU were imposed under the previous government. If it's drastic action that's needed to clean up our skies, years on, London is still waiting for it.
Joining me is Alan Andrews from the environment legal organisation Client Earth. Alan, how important was the ruling this week?
It was hugely important as a first step in our fight for clean air. For the first time, we have a national court holding that the government is breaking the law by failing to protect us from harmful air pollution. It's got to put enormous pressure on the government to come forward with a real ambitious plan to tackle this problem, because it's killing people.
Right.
4,300 deaths each year in London alone.
Are you proud of that? Obviously not the death, but are you proud of the fact that You've had to actually go through this process for it to be and have a light shone upon it, and those figures highlighted. The government's failed.
Well, actually, the government spent a great deal of money and investment in tackling this issue. It is a big issue, and it's quite right that we highlight it. We should take it very, very seriously. But it's also worth remembering that, in fact, out of the 27 EU member states, 22 are in a broadly similar position to the EU. That's to say this.
Right.
We're meeting the targets both daily and annually on particulates, but there is an issue about nitrogen oxide, and we, like many of the others...
It's the thing that's killing people, isn't it?
But what I'm saying is you put the British situation in context with much of the West, of the Western European part of the EU in particular. So we've all got to redouble our efforts on this, and that's what we're doing. We've invested over £1 billion since the general election on air quality measures.
Does that satisfy you?
10 billion.
No. I mean, the first thing is that the coalition government have not come forward with any new significant policies to tackle nitrogen dioxide. Yes, this is an EU-wide problem. Other member states are struggling. But London is the worst polluted, in terms of nitrogen dioxide, worst polluted capital city in the EU. So we are bottom of the class.
I think it's fair to say now, Adam, isn't it, that the anticipation is that London's compliance time is about broadly on the same trajectory as Paris's. Now, I do accept that we've got to continue to work at it, and, you know, the Mayor has got an awful lot he's doing on that. That's just putting it into context, that's
Right,
all.
but, I mean, well, these standards were first imposed under a Labour government, and the first target was breached within weeks. Why wasn't anything done to address it then?
I think loads was done to address it.
But clearly not enough by either government.
And I congratulate Client Earth on their success. I mean, even for me as a London MP, it's never been top of my list or my understanding. I can't believe that it's the second most biggest public health issue, and more people die prematurely from this than from road traffic accidents, alcohol and obesity, twice as many. I mean, I suppose.
So should it be a greater concern?
Gosh, absolutely. I mean, isn't Marylebone High Street something like the 4th worst place in Europe? I mean, it's.
Marylebone Road is the worst of any capital city in the EU, but streets like Putney High Street and Brixton Road in Lambeth are 3 and 4 times the legal limits.
Do you think it helped that the Mayor scrapped the congestion western extension zone, bearing in mind much of this nitrogen dioxide, of course, comes from diesel fumes?
I actually do think he was right to scrap the Western Extension. It was extremely unpopular, I have to say. And after all, you've got to look
dreadful for air quality.
But you've also got to look at the raft of other impacts that congestion charge had on businesses, for example, in the area.
Part of the reason why we don't sort this out is because we can't see it physically, and because it offends or affects poor people in poor parts of London. So it isn't the top of anybody's list, and it needs to be.
A bit of that, but I think it's also worth saying, we've talked about the Mayor's policies. Okay, we got rid of the Western Extension, but at the same time, we have now got the largest hybrid bus fleet in Europe.
All right,
so there's other ways of tackling it, which are
could
important.
hefty fines be on the horizon?
Potentially. I think the first thing to be clear on is the last thing anyone wants, including Client Earth, is for the UK taxpayer to pay for fines. The process we're going through now will not result in fines. This is the European Court deciding on some legal questions, namely, is compliance by 2015 compulsory, or is 2025 okay? It will then come back to the UK Supreme Court, who don't have the power to issue fines, but they could order the government to come up with a new plan to tackle pollution.
Alan Andrews, thank you very much, and we'll continue to follow this story. Now, it's time for a look at the rest of the political news in 60 seconds.
Is London going Dutch? Trials in Berkshire have been taking place for roundabouts like those seen in the Netherlands that separate cyclists from other traffic. City Hall say they could be seen in the capital by 2014. Councillor Brian Coleman, the controversial former mayor of Barnet and political boss of the London Fire Brigade, has admitted a charge of common assault following an incident in Finchley High Road. He was ordered to pay over £1,000 in fines and costs. London's airports are not running at full capacity. That's the verdict of the London Assembly, who found all of London's runways are underused, with about half of runway slots at Luton and Stansted not being used at all. NHS bosses in London published their preferred option for South West London healthcare, with St Helier and Epsom hospitals set to lose their A&E and maternity units.
Shall of all, let's pick up on that last issue. Obviously, something close to your constituents' hearts.
Yeah.
I mean, did you think that St Heliers was off the hook?
No, it was never off the hook.
Wasn't it?
But the plans are even worse than anybody expected. I mean, basically, they're going to leave us with a walk-in centre. I mean, 90,000 people went to the A&E at St Helier last year. 3,600 babies were born. This is not a small place. I mean, it's interesting, we were talking about air quality. Those people are now going to be in ambulances and in cars trying to get to St George's in Tooting, trying to get to Croydon University. I mean, it's a plan that's devastating.
Except, of course, health professionals quite often say that adding a few extra minutes to your journey, if you're going to a specialist centre, won't in fact harm your outcome. It might improve it.
But we're talking about volumes. We're talking about 90,000 people who turned up. We're not talking about a few around the edges. And they admitted 25% of those people who went to the A&E. These are not people who are making irrational decisions.
Right, Bob Neal, that is the problem, isn't it? Is money being put into the other hospitals who are going to have to absorb the tens of thousands of people that will no longer be going to St Heliers?
Well, certainly as far as my own part of the world, we've had a similar exercise in relation to what happened with Bromley and Queen Elizabeth in Woolwich and Lewisham Hospital. Two things that struck me, that there is a commitment to investment in the other hospitals. That's very important. We do have that.
And, and in Croydon Hospital, your Conservative colleague is very worried about how that hospital is going to cope.
I think it is important that we get the right investment to help those cope. I took that up with the department in relation to Princess Royal at Bromley, and I've had some reassurance I think we will get somewhere.
I don't know, if Bob's ever had the opportunity to go to St George's in Tooting, but I defy anybody to go onto that site and understand where you're going to take tens of thousands of people and be able to treat them.
Is it possible?
Well, I think the other bit I was going to make, which struck me was, and you've raised the point, Joe, which we also have to bear in mind, is that I was very struck that the plans around Lewisham and South East London, there was a very strong consensus from the healthcare professionals. They weren't just saying this is a marginal thing.
All right.
They were strongly saying you need these specialist units. Now, are we the best place to second-guess them?
I'll leave that question. Thank you to both my guests, and now it's back to Andrew Neil.